I normally took care of these and 100 other things, but Matt was pretty clear I'm not to do any of it. I also stopped working on my manual. After a few months of this, but sooner than I expected, I was laid off by Carl and Matt for budgetary reasons. Of course, they listed my job on Indeed that same day for a laughably low salary. I was given no warning, just sat down for a meeting with the two and walked out the door. Matt didn't allow me to take anything from my desk, access my computer, or say my goodbyes to my coworkers. He was also very clear I was not to retain any company documents or information. Sure thing, boss. So I left, and I heard from my coworkers still there that over the next few months, things took an even worse nosedive. They weren't able to fill my job, and nobody could cover most of my actual job duties or any of my ancillary duties. By this point, vendors weren't being paid, and payroll wasn't going out on time. And then I got the call. Matt found the file I had left in a conspicuous spot on the network drive. Job manual and processes.zip. It was encrypted. What's in it? Oh, just a draft of all my job duties and everything I was responsible for that I worked on during downtime. Why was it even encrypted? Well, it had a bunch of confidential data and passwords in it, boss. What's the password? Sorry, boss, I don't know. I didn't retain it after leaving, but it's in my files. In reality, since it wasn't finished, the manual wasn't going to be some panacea for all the company's problems, but I had padded it with a lot of images, so I imagine the file size was pretty attractive, and the password was indeed in my files. If Matt cared to look, he'd find an unlabeled sticky note with a nondescript string of letters and numbers in a random folder in one of my 24 filing cabinets. As an epilogue, about 3 months after I talked to Matt, Carl fired him after discovering what a disaster the department had become. My coworkers both left around the same time for better opportunities. Carl's still been unable to fill any of these jobs after almost 18 months, so the entire accounting department is staffed by contractors and consultants, who I am sure are costing the company a fortune. I heard the board is looking for a change in company presidents. Okay, so it's too bad that OP's moving away from the area within 6 months because they should have applied to be the company president. That would have been absolutely epic. Could you imagine the look on Carl's face the day they were replaced by OP, who is somebody that they previously let go? That would be epic. Now, the part of me that really loves revenge thinks that this file that was left on the computer by OP could have been something to smack them back once they finally got the password for it. Just imagine this. They spend all this time going through all of OP's stuff. They finally figure out that that piece of paper with the random numbers and letters is the actual password for this file. Then they open the file, the job manual and processes, and all it says inside it is whatever Matt assigns me, and then has a whole bunch of pictures of middle fingers. Come on, that would be great. This story comes to us from Semi-Teen-Up. That time a boss killed his own company. This is my dad's story, but he's not into Reddit. My dad is a hard worker. This happened about 15 years ago. Worked for a company that fixed and rented heavy equipment. Backhoes, scissor lifts, steamrollers, forklifts, etc. His boss, the CEO of the company, whom he reported to directly, was a middle-aged Italian guy whose grasp of English was tenuous at best. He understood what people were saying, but had trouble communicating his own intentions back clearly. On the other hand, my dad had zero grasp of Italian, but spoke perfect English. However, he was a solid mechanic who would go on to make the machine bay of this company something approaching a Sherman production line a la 1943. Crap got done. And even though he didn't always understand what the boss wanted him to do, he just focused on the reason he was hired. Manage the repair bay, hire new mechanics, train new hires, and off-site on-call repairs. Well, boss guy gets it in his head that my dad is going to replace him as the leader of the company, because he's much better liked, speaks perfect English in an English-speaking country, and has basically all the department heads coming to him for help, even though he's technically only in charge of the repair bay. And so he calls my dad in, chews him out. We think it was mostly Italian, so my dad wasn't picking up on it, but the tone indicated as much, and manages to communicate that he's being fired for poor work performance. And my dad just smiles, shakes the guy's hand and leaves. And thanks to his less than firm grasp on both the English language and business law, the boss guy just sent him on his way with his last paycheck and nothing else. So my dad started his own business in the heavy equipment mechanic market, and after telling all his old work buddies about the situation, suddenly got a bunch of new hires, and his old workplace suddenly had a lot of vacancies that the boss had no idea how to fill, because the guy he'd hired to do that had just been fired. He went under about 6 months later. Sometimes my dad drives past where the old shop was on his way to a call. When he does, he just laughs and laughs. OP added an edit down below this one. It says, "Edit, for everyone who's been saying this isn't malicious compliance, here's why I think it is. When my dad was brought into the office, he knew right away that he was getting fired, and he knew right away what the heck he was being fired for. Of course, the boss didn't say that the reason he was firing my dad was because he was feeling threatened by my dad's popularity and work ethic. Instead, he just blustered through my dad's poor work performance and fed him a line of BS about how he'd put up with it for a long time, but enough was enough. And my dad thought about taking him to court, but then, as he tells it, a bolt of lightning came down from on high, and he just reached out and shook his boss's hand. He knew that if he took the butthole to court, he might get money out of him, almost certainly would have, but his boss would have had time to think about things and try to force a non-compete contract down his throat. By just resigning immediately, he knew his ex-boss would never even think of it until it was too late. And he double-timed it, putting in paperwork to get his new company off the ground before ex-boss could think of it. So maybe I didn't explain details and motivations clearly enough, but based on how my dad told the story, I think it definitely fits into malicious compliance. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Desert Fairy. It says, "The most humbling truth of business is that you will create your own destruction. A toxic workplace will spawn your competition, and poor services will drive your customers to the other guy." You know, if we look back on this one, the Italian guy was actually correct because OP was going to lead a company, just not the one that the Italian guy was in. He went and created his own and drove the other one out of business. You know, the Italian guy could have just made OP's dad like a managing partner or something, and OP's dad could have done all the work running the place while the Italian guy just collected paychecks and did nothing. I guess that's an opportunity that was absolutely wasted. This story comes to us from Harley Davidson JK. Need me to be more efficient? Okay, here's 100 pounds worth of damage. I got my first job when I was 16. Dodgy, family-run business. Paid less than minimum wage, but whatever. Anyway, there was one manager there who was the definition of middle-aged women hate the younger female coworkers. Let's call her Smudge. Her mascara application was dreadful. Smudge was one of those people who gave you the most harsh, vicious critiques, but with a huge smile on her face. She wrote the book on passive aggressiveness, and for some reason, she was constantly on my case. Even though I'd go above and beyond in my role for this crappy company. For reference, I worked in an area where I just collected and cleaned dishes, which had to be transported upstairs, restock stuff, etc. Anyway, this one shift, there was a huge rush, and I had to run around collecting dirty dishes. The trays were so flimsy, it felt like I was piling stuff on cling film. So I couldn't stack as much as Smudge wanted me to, even though I was still way overstacking dishes. OP, you need to be more efficient and stack the cups and plates way more than this. This is just lazy. And pointed to my tray that was about to give way in my tiny 16-year-old girl arms. No problem. I got a new clean tray and went to the downstairs section, which was still heaving with dishes, even though I'd made several trips already. But orders are orders. I piled 2 stacks of 10 ceramic plates, 4 thick round mugs, 4 tall slender mugs, and 7 tiny espresso mugs. The tray honestly felt like it was going to break, but efficiency is key, so I used all my strength to lift it up and began walking up the stairs, littered in rubbish because nobody did their jobs. What do you know? I trip on a wet wipe and couldn't hold the weight of the tray, so all those dishes fell and 10 plates smashed, 7 mugs got chipped, but I had to keep pushing up the stairs because